Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. My name is Reed. Along with me is Mike. Mike, we're here to review the best comics of this week. Rather short stack, only three or four books that I would really recommend for folks. But one book that I read kind of bridged us to a larger topic. So we'll kind of do this like we used to do once in what's in the stack. We're going to talk about a larger topic, and then we'll jump into the books at the end. So Batman and Robin. This is the 21st issue of this book. Philip Kennedy Johnson, and I think Fernandez's art. This is a pretty good comic book. I will.
There were
We're not
some
going to
good
jump too
issues in the
much into it,
beginning.
but what I will say, I think this book does well. It is a true partnership book. It's half about Bruce, half about Damian. Writes father-son dynamics pretty well. And I think it's a good read. So I'm not in any way trashing that book. I do think if you want a good Batman book, it's a very solid one, and Philip Kennedy Johnson has done a very good job on it. What we wanted to talk a little bit about, though, is legacy characters, the notion of these legacy characters. In that, what's interesting is Damian Wayne has been around a while now. I mean, almost 20 years. Still doesn't really carry his own comic book. Has had a few chances at it, never really goes anywhere. He's not a bad character, but unlike Dick Grayson, where Nightwing is a character who largely for almost 40 years now, has carried his own book, and probably longer than that if you count Teen Titans, where he was really the lead of that book as Robin. You look at Wally West, he's another legacy character, somewhat aided by Barry being out of the comic, but I think why he worked is very similar to Dick Grayson. They were not mini versions of the hero. Right. Dick Grayson, yes, he's the adopted son technically of Bruce Wayne. Very different personality, very different skill set, lives in a different city, has his own enemies. He is not miniature amateur detective version of Batman. For me, I think the biggest thing, Mike, that kills legacy characters like Damian, it's not that they're massively unpopular. I think their popularity will always be capped because they come off as mini version of the main hero. For you, do you see that in characters like Damien, yeah, X-23, who's like the girl version of Wolverine? Like, do you think
Wolverine.
that is hurting those characters? Do you think it's just when they put them out there, there's always going to be a cap because it's just basically, hey, this character, but what do you think
Well,
about that
there's always going to be a cap because um, they're competing with the main title,
now? Hmm.
uh, and that's why it's perfect in Batman and Robin, where it's woven in now, and it's been a strong book for what 2 years now. I
Yeah,
remember
21 issues. I mean, Josh Williamson started it. Kennedy Johnson really took it over and took it next level. But yeah, you're about 2 years in on it.
we're about 2 years in on it, and it's great, but it's got Batman in it. You can't lose, right? You
Yeah.
put Batman in a book, you're going to get sales. So, yeah, they're always going to be probably about half of what the big book was on a good day, and it's just that it's a competing title. You're going to have your fans, but then they also want Batman. That's why Batman and Robin is the best of both worlds because you got Damian Wayne and you have Bruce Wayne, and you can't lose with that. But characters like Wally West, there was no Barry Allen. It was the only Flash book for over 20 years. So if you
Yeah.
liked a speedster hero and you love Barry Allen, you were sad that he was gone, but you still picked up Flash. Even though it was Wally West, you knew who Wally West was because he's been in comics since almost since the beginning of Flash of the Silver Age. So yeah, so there was no competing book, and that's why that book succeeded. If all of a sudden DC Comics were to do something really stupid and not have Batman anymore, you'd have to pick between, and then you'd still be fighting between Nightwing and Damian Wayne
Damian
and
Wayne,
and,
Jason
and,
Todd, Tim
and
Drake.
Jason
Yeah.
Todd, and it's like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. So yeah, these you're going to put out these books with these other characters, but I don't think there's a fighting chance for them to catch on. I mean, you look at the trouble that, and it's not really a legacy character, but you look at Miles Morales and Spider-Man,
Hmm.
as popular as Miles is, he doesn't really carry his own book for very long
He's
either.
never, he's, people take it as an insult because I've seen this. People will say Miles Morales is Miles Morales, Peter Parker, Spider Man. Like I've heard people say that, and so some take it as the reason I think that is so popular is by making Miles Spider Man, you're permanently putting him in Peter's shadow. He's not gonna overtake that title.
Yeah,
It's nothing to do with, oh, we don't like him because he doesn't look like Peter. No, Peter is Spider Man. Period. It's like if you tried to make a new detective and go, we're going to call him Sherlock Holmes. He's not Sherlock Holmes.
yeah,
Sherlock Holmes is Sherlock Holmes. And I
right.
think that's the issue with so many of these legacy characters is they take the most boring, predictable routes with most of them. And like a great example, and I think John Kent is a case study in terms of how you fail a comic book character. And that has nothing to do with the fact that they made him the bisexual Superman. Whatever they wanted to do, that's fine. They gave him the most boring path possible. Minnie Clark, who just has this one difference in that he dates different people than Clark would. The interesting thing you could have done with Jonathan Kent, you could have changed his powers. You could have had, hey, him being the product of Lois Lane and Superman massively limits what he can do, or gives him only one of Clark's powers, or completely fundamentally alters his DNA to where he's just a speedster or can just fly. And you could have created this really different book where it's the legacy of Superman. Sure, you get all the points if he's got the S and he's Clark's kid, but you could have done something really unique and interesting with he will never be Clark because he's not 100% Kryptonian. And so you could have had different limitations. You could have had where, hey, his powers only work when the sun is out, and when it's not, he can't operate. Something. You could have taken any one of a million different routes that would have given the book a different opportunity to succeed because it would be like, it's not just Clark. When you're like, he's going to have all Clark's powers. He's going to be exactly the same. He's going to wear a costume that looks like a slight deviation of Clark's. Okay, at that point, he's the dollar store version of Superman. It's what he is. He's not going to pass Clark in terms of legacy, right? Same thing I think they've done with, I think Damian Wayne has a ton of potential if they lean into the Ra's al Ghul elements because he's half Al Ghul, half Wayne. If you lean into that, and you don't have to make him a crazy psychopathic assassin, but you could have that maybe he's like immortal or has some sort of powers from all the exposure from that family of the Lazarus and something. Going the most predictable route of he's a vigilante, much like Bruce. He looks like Bruce. Always be, and again, I partially love the father son dynamic in that book. But when you take characters and you're like, we're just going to create a small version of the character, we're always going to look at the character and go, I just want the original version. It's
Yeah, I
all
think
of them kind of become like you and I live in Texas, right? HEB is a great grocery store. HEB has their own sodas, right? And it's like HEB cola. And then there's Coke. And like people who Sam's, right? Sam's Club has like Dr. Lightning instead of Dr. Pepper. All these characters, they're the Dr. Lightning of
right,
superheroes. And the
right.
main guys are, it's never going to be that they're as popular as the other because you've tried to put them in direct competition with them. And it's just not fun to read. Like, oh, it's like Batman, but like younger. Like, why? I just give me Bruce then. I think that's why. So, Laura Kinney, X-23, is really interesting in it. I actually like the character quite a bit. But once you start calling her Wolverine, just like Logan, and she's wearing a yellow and blue costume, just like Logan, and she's standoffish with people, just like Logan. It's like, okay, then just I'll read Logan. Like, what? I'm so, oh, well, it's a girl. So, completely different. Like, I think if they got creative, and I think the interesting thing, like, as much as I don't blame them, because I think X-23 is an interesting idea, how fascinating would it have been if Logan's kid had instead been like Logan's kid with Storm? It has a mixture of their powers, right? That would be interesting. That's a different character. It's Wolverine's kid, but he unpredictable powers, right?
I,
I
I,
think Wally's kids have been interesting in that they don't just make Wally's kids like speedsters. they have different powers than Wally. I just think as long as they keep presenting it as, hey, it's a miniature version of it's Aquaman's baby who's just like Aquaman. It's like, okay, well, and I think it comes off. Me and you watch a lot of sports. When I was mentioning, it comes off kind of like these spring football leagues. Like the United Football League, the USFL, the XFL. The main superheroes of the NFL. You're not going to compete and beat them. You've got to do something different, and I think that's why so many of the legacy characters fail. Do you, Mike? Do you think the other part? Do you think the heroes having a kid is an issue? Like, do you think Superman having a son who becomes a superhero, do you think that like inherently makes the kid less interesting because immediately they're in like obviously look, in real life we love our kids. I think most of us would probably want our kids to take a different path than us in terms of I wouldn't want my kid going like the exact same career, job and everything I've done. I think for the superhero thing, to me, inherently, when they make the superhero have a kid and the kid wants to be a superhero, I don't know. That always comes across as lame to me. Does that hit you the same way with that, or like, are you a fan of that? How do you feel on that trend?
Well, I think you really hit on this at the beginning of your statement. You're really hitting on four cylinders when you're talking about how make the character different. And we all love our kids. We want them to grow up and be successful. We don't really want them to necessarily take the same path that we did, although that is deep in our history. Our
Hmm.
ancestors traditionally followed in the paternal occupation. That's why many of us have the last names that we do.
Yeah.
But the thing about it is that you know what happens when kids grow up, oftentimes they're completely different than we are, and some parents have
Hmm.
more trouble embracing that than others. But that's a great dynamic for a story, man. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
great dynamic for a story. And I think you have some very creative ideas there where maybe Superman's son, maybe he wants to be a reporter like his mom. Maybe he
Yep.
wants to do something else. He's a used car salesman, but he has superpowers. I don't know. You could
Yeah.
do a
There's so
million.
much potential, and they always take
Yeah, the
the
easy
most
route,
predictable route, and it's like,
but that's not always the best storytelling route. I mean, everyone can relate to having kids, and we all know they usually grow up way differently than us. They have
mhm.
different interests, they have different lives, they have different career paths, different aptitudes than we have, and but that's what makes them interesting and unique. And you lose some of that. I still think that being said, still, if you created a comic where Wolverine had a daughter and she came out completely different, like more like Storm or whatever.
Yeah. You could pick.
Um,
I just picked her as a random character that he kept out of it.
no, but you pick the power or whatever. Still, that comic would be a short run comic, but it would be a fun read.
Well, I think you're right in it. I think a lot of them would probably fail, but it would possibly lead to a certain breakout character too. I think a couple more would hit.
It
I
has at
think
least it has
that's
the potential.
and again, I think like you said, look, it's not we want our kids to carry our legacies on in terms of things that are good. Right? Like with my children, I would hope that like, hey, they've seen my marriage with their mom and go, okay, that's what a healthy marriage looks like. I want to marry someone who has that kind of like the superhero thing. What's different is most of these superheroes live really miserable lives. Like they're and so like there's also a part of like, oh, I want them to pursue the same life. Like Peter Parker has a kid and he wants the kid to follow in his footsteps. It's like, Peter, your life has sucked, man.
Yeah,
Like,
it's been rough.
as a good parent, you probably don't want that for your kids. Like,
Right.
yes, they may inevitably still go that path, but I think that's the thing is they either need to do something where if the kids of superheroes are going to be a thing or a legacy character, I think they need to mix it up where maybe you do something like, hey, Superman and Lois's kid has different powers, or maybe Superman, the new 52 would have been interesting had they had like Superman and Wonder Woman never had a kid, kind
Oh
of like they've done
yeah.
in different continuities. right? And you could have had, hey, a Kryptonian Amazonian hybrid, and what does that character look like, right? I think the Flash, like if they Wally's kids has been interesting because they get powers, but they're not just miniature versions of him. I just think
Right.
if they would go a little bit more creatively with it, you might have more success. In that, I think a character like Damian Wayne, he's been around 20 years. They've tried to do a lot with him. I like the character a lot, but he's always going to be capped potential wise because you've trapped him into being mini Bruce. And even when they do future stories, he's always a version of Batman. And it's like, at a certain point, man, I'd rather just read, I'd rather
Batman.
just read Bruce. And I think
Right.
that's the same thing with all the Robins. I think Dick Grayson has broke out because he's been around so long. But all the other ones, like it would have been really interesting if you'd have made one of the other Robins take a completely different path in life rather than just being, hey, it's Bruce but worse, and they embrace one aspect of him. Right. I
Yeah.
think if you would have had it to where, hey, maybe Tim Drake becomes like a globe trotting different sort of superhero who does different things and takes on different, or maybe he goes to space, or like there's all kinds of things you could try. But when you make it, and I don't know if any of those are good ideas, but I do know if you just make them, hey, it's Bruce but worse, that's not going to go anywhere. And I think sometimes they think like, I think even with these replacement characters that they try, where like they'll be like, well, here's the new Thor or the new Iron Man or the new Hulk or whatever. It doesn't work again because we're always going to, it's the off-brand version. It's always going to come back to it's that cheap store-bought soda brand or whatever brand where you're like, it's not their genuine article. Just give me the
You know,
genuine
and
article.
and just like in the Doctor Thunder or whatever, you
Hmm.
have your fans that love it,
Yeah,
and they only buy Doctor Thunder, and
but there's a reason it doesn't overtake Dr. Pepper.
but it's a small percentage,
Yeah, no,
and that reflects in the sales of when they break them out into these mini runs.
no. And again, you have so few who have really hit. You
Yeah,
got Wally, you've got Dick Grayson, and again, I think Wally and Dick Grayson have largely succeeded because they made them so different from the originals. Wally, same powers as Barry, but they made it a family book. He got married. His marriage was a huge part of the book. His kids are a huge part of the book. Dick Grayson, yeah, technically vigilante, no powers, but massively different skill set than Bruce, massively different personality. I think they've got to do something. But when you want to do just, hey, it's miniature version of the character,
and
it's never going to work.
interesting side historical side note on Wally.
Hmm.
Uh, Originally, for the first 30 issues of the new Flash run that started in '59, Wally had the same costume even
As
as
Barry.
Barry. It was just smaller, and there
Yeah.
were some comments like we couldn't tell which one was the Flash, and due to perspective, which one was Wally because they look exactly the same.
Oh no,
And
I don't like the new redesign they've done with the black on the suit for Wally, but I'll give him credit. At least if when Barry gets his powers back and they end this stupid Barry has no, at least if they keep that, I'll know which Flash is on panel when they show the two of them. Because
so
that's been the most annoying thing lately. It's been like someone
they
runs in a Flash costume. You're like, unless someone calls him by name, I have no idea which one that is.
So, you could take little lessons from history. They ended up changing his costume in Flash 135, and he got that great original design by Carmine Infantino with the open top and the
Yep,
flowing
the
red
yellow.
hair
No,
out on the
that's
top
a
of it.
great
Yeah,
costume.
yeah.
It's a great costume.
So the little lessons that they've learned along the way between the sidekick and the main character, um, those things have been tried and tested, and you can learn from those lessons if you want to.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting. I'd be interested in what folks see down below. I mean, why do you guys think so many of these legacy characters are failing? I think even, just to kind of close it up, I think even when they try to do something radically different, they fall into the same thing. It's one of the most common complaints that you and I have had in comic books and the MCU. A character that you and I genuinely love is Sam Wilson, the Falcon. He
Oh
is a
yeah,
character we both really like as Falcon. The worst thing they have ever done to Sam Wilson is make him Captain America
yeah,
because he goes from being this really cool character that you love on his own to it's like, dude, just give Steve the shield. What are we doing here? Like,
yeah.
Why is the
You
junior
know,
partner right?
it,
And it
it,
sucks because it reduces him to being me and you talked about this when the movie came out. That movie basically turned Sam Wilson from his cool independent character to he has to be Steve. And so he's not really Cap and he's no longer Falcon.
and my
And no
my
one's
big
ever gonna
complaint
fully
was
see him as Cap.
my big complaint was why Falcon was such a cool character, and yes, he can take up the mantle of Steve Rogers, and he should because he is the heir apparent. But he
But
doesn't
he
have to
doesn't
change his
need to be.
costume, and you don't have to do all that. He was a perfectly fine
You
character,
could have just
and
literally had Falcon and now he has the shield as a weapon
yeah,
in his
that look is really really cool.
Instead, once you pigeon him into Captain America and all his adventures become Steve adventures, just with some added undertones to it, it comes across as a cheap imitation. And no, I mean, funnily enough, like the MCU is hilarious, and like my family, my parents don't really keep up with superheroes in terms of like they watched a lot of MCU movies, but they're not into the lore and what happened. And I remember my mom was watching, she was watching something, she saw a preview, she's like, okay, there was a Captain America preview, but I never saw Captain America. I'm like, yeah, no, that's Falcon. It's like,
Yeah,
oh, that's stupid. And I think there's a ton of people where as soon as you do that, that's what happens. And I think they've got to figure out a more creative way to try some of these
and
legacy
it just
characters in a
diminished the
different way.
Falcon. I'm
Yeah,
like, and when you didn't need to, because the Falcon was awesome all by himself.
great character. And a lot of these legacy characters are great. They just have to find a way to make them look different, different settings, different villains, different powers, different personalities, something. The mini version of the character you love doesn't work, I think, for many of them. And that's, I think, why you see a cap on so much popularity. Yeah, I think that's why we have so many characters who are failing. All right, real quickly, we'll run through what was in the stack. Not a ton, but I do think there were four solid books I want to recommend to folks. I won't go into too much detail on a lot of them, but Absolute Batman #8, their take on Mr. Freeze in this one. My only complaint with Absolute Batman. This is apparently one of the #1 comic books selling period anywhere. I believe I saw it was the best selling comic book across the board. This is issue 8. We are on our third artist through 8 issues.
Oh,
The
really?
art is not bad, but what the heck, guys? This is your most important comic. And we are on our third artist through 8 issues. And I think what we've had, the main guy did 4, and then one fill in and now 2 from this one. So we don't even have the same fill in guy. Like, just delay the book a bit. And again, nothing against Marcos Martin, who does the art on here. It is pretty good art, but it's not Nick Dragotta's art. And that's the selling point in a lot of this. It's a fun comic book. This is a lot like an old 90s comic. It's a little bit extreme, overly violent. But I will say it has justified its existence in terms of it's not just a Batman book that's the same with a different costume. It genuinely has some interesting takes on the characters. Your enjoyment will vary on how much you're okay with like Batman's world changing. I do think it's really interesting, and I think it's always well written by Snyder. But even in a book that succeeds from the big two, I'm like, this is like the biggest comic book going right now, and we're on third artist through 8 issues. Just crazy. Only Marvel book I'd recommend this week. I continue to be surprised by this Red Hulk comic book. This is the fourth issue. It's tied into this One World Under Doom series. Largely, that doesn't really affect this too much. This is a prison break comic. Doom had the Red Hulk, Machine Man, and Deathlock, who are 3 really underutilized characters. He had them all imprisoned. It was a cool little Great Escape-esque prison break from these 3 characters. Really showcased Thunderbolt Ross's character well. He doesn't even turn into the Red Hulk until the end of this issue for the last 2 issues. It was just cool to see this older general team up with 2 superheroes, a prison, simple concept, but really, really well done. It is tied into that Doom event, but largely all you need to know is Doctor Doom is in charge of the world and he had them into prison. Very good. Benjamin Percy is doing a good job on that book. Very enjoyable. Last 2, you and I are probably going to do a video on a couple of these. Geiger #14. Geiger's fantastic, folks. This is over a year and a half now of storytelling. I think it's about the 20 something issue of Geiger. It's a great story, great art. Johns and Frank are just fantastic on this book. I can't say enough. We're going to do a video probably in June about the best books so far this year. This will definitely be on it. Great comic. Ghost Machine
and
does not
and from
disappoint.
all the
And cheaper
interviews
book than everything else. Go ahead, Mike.
For all the interviews, Jeff Johns is just really loving his life right now over there.
No, it's great, and I think this is what's interesting about Ghost Machine, and we'll probably talk about this a bit more. You can tell they're just having so much fun creating these, and
They
it's
really, truly are, and it
the
shows.
comparison when you read something like this, where you can tell they're setting things up and they're having fun and they're putting pieces on the board in different places, and there seems to be, at the very least, a long-term plan. It's so refreshing to read compared to everything else where you can tell they're like, we better wrap this up quickly because we don't know if we're going to be around
Oh
6 issues
no,
from now.
they set up a long-term plan, and now that the books are really, really selling, they are really just all in the juice and
No,
love it.
and you got to love better art, consistent compared to Batman, right? And I love Absolute Batman. Same artist. I think they've only had 14 issues. We had two with a sub fill-in artist who was Paul Pelletier, who's an amazing artist. And then it was right back to Frank. 14 issues, all of them 3.99, all of them cardstock covers, no huge breaks in between.
Just,
Every
just
month I read a Ghost
rubbing it.
Machine book, I'm like, why can they do this and you can't?
They're
And
just rubbing their noses in it, is what
yeah,
they
no.
are.
Last book, Flash Gordon #9. Flash Gordon, Jeremy Adams. They're just killing it on this book. Mike and I are going to do a longer form video talking
We
about Flash
got to do
Gordon,
a longer
where
video
the
on
book's
that one.
at.
Yeah.
And this is such a surprisingly great book in that it really just is sci-fi great escapism and storytelling. I think that's the last couple years, the loss of Star Wars, the loss of Star Trek for me personally, as far as sci-fi storytelling, and both of those series just went places I wasn't thrilled with. And Star Wars comics, I think, fell off a long time ago. Star Trek still occasionally puts some interesting things out there. But
They're
it's
with
just great to see
IDW, right?
sci-fi space storytelling from an original character that's how all the potential of a sci-fi story is in that book. It's well done. It's fun. It's not trying to redefine the world for you. It's not trying to say something. It is just, if you love sci-fi and you love escapism, that's the comic for you to read. Great stuff. Only four this week, but I do think all four are pretty good and worth checking out if you want something to read for this week. As always,
Yeah.
folks, though, let us know, what do you guys think below? What was in your stack? Mike, did you have anything you were working through? I know you've been spitting over, moving over towards the oldies. Anything old you're reading this week?
Oh yeah. I am loving The Man Without Fear.
Okay.
A buddy of mine just got this edition and let me borrow all five of them. Thank you, sir. and it was amazing. So I love that. We're also diving into some old stuff. We're doing Watchmen. So if you haven't seen our Watchmen series, it started last week,
Yep.
and
Next week we'll
we're
do an
doing
issue of Watchmen. Absolutely. Kind of go through there, read some
for the
class.
next 12 weeks, one issue a week, which is amazing to kind of reread it. If you hadn't have read it in a long time, read along with us over the next 12 weeks.
Absolutely. Let us know. What do you guys think below? What do you think about the earlier topic we talked about with legacy characters? What was in your stack? And if you agree or disagree with us, please let us know. Always happy to see anything from you guys. Again, we'll never pretend to be the experts, just two guys with a stack of comics giving our opinions. Thank you as always, folks. God bless you. We'll catch you in our next video.
Thanks, everybody.